Hello, vinyl community. We are back. Today I've got a topic that I've been reticent to talk about for a while just because there's a little bit of a stigma around it, and some people are really into it, some people are not. Some people want to be into it and don't know how to get into it. And so what that topic is jazz. And I'm going to start off by saying, first of all, I'm not a foremost authority on jazz. I probably started getting into it, I'd say, in the last 8, 10 years or so. Real slowly too, but the more I delve into it, the more I like it. So first and foremost, I'm going to just give you some real basics about jazz, and then we're going to talk about the genres. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of the big artists that are in jazz and maybe directions for you to go into if you don't know where to start. So this is a Jazz 101 starter pack is what we're going to call it. So first and foremost, jazz is improvisation, right? When you have an orchestra, you have a conductor, you have sheet music. Jazz very often is not going off sheet music. It's a group of individuals that are usually improvising as they go. And a lot of times it will have a trumpet, it will have a saxophone, a lot of times it'll have an upright bass or a double bass, a lot of times a piano as well, and drums a lot of times, but not necessarily all of those. They can be stripped down as well. So first, let's talk about the jazz types or the genres. And those types are usually separated by decades, right? So the very first early jazz, traditional jazz, Dixieland, was like the 1910s, the 1920s. And you have artists like Louis Armstrong, you have Jelly Roll Morton, and that's kind of the earliest roots of jazz. So it's African music, but more so African American influenced music. So the next one we have under that is called swing music or big band jazz. That was in the 30s, through the 30s and 40s. And some of the big artists you have there are Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Coleman Hawkins is another one. Then we move into a genre called bebop that started in the 40s. And this was differentiated by an upbeat tempo. And a lot of times you had soloing. And some of the big artists that came out during this time playing this type of music were Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And then we go into probably what is the most known, or where people start really often. It's called cool jazz, and that started in the late 40s and went throughout the 50s. Some artists continued to play cool jazz throughout their career, even though it may have not been popular in that decade. But this is when it was the most popular. It has more of a relaxed style. Sometimes there'll be vocals along with it as well. An example of someone that does vocals sometimes along with playing would be Chet Baker. And then there's different styles, right? And I prefer it's called the West Coast style of cool jazz. And I'll get into some of those artists later on. But for our purposes here, we're talking about Chet Baker, we're talking about Dave Brubeck, we're talking about Stan Getz, and Miles Davis, and even John Coltrane started with cool jazz. So the next one we have is called hard bop and soul jazz. This started around the mid 50s. And hard bop combines bebop with a dose of blues and soul. So that's where you get the soul jazz. And the soul jazz more so into the 60s and 70s, whereas the hard bop and bop would have been 50s, so mid 50s to early 60s for the most part is kind of the time frame. So this is kind of what is considered the golden age of jazz, or it's what has the most desirable titles that most people that are into jazz want. And so you have artists like John Coltrane, Horace Silver, Hank Mobley, and just Lee Morgan, just a myriad of artists on the big labels that were making jazz at this time. The one after that started in the late 50s is called modal jazz. And modal jazz takes a harmony and a chord and then a scale or a mode. And then what they do is they play around with that, right? They play around with the position. Sometimes it stays where it is. Sometimes it goes in a different place. But this is beyond what I have for music theory, right? I didn't really go that far into band, and I didn't get that much education as it comes in regards to music theory. So I don't know a ton about modal jazz, but I do know that John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, and Wayne Shorter had several albums that came out during this time that were classified as modal jazz. And there's some big ones that I'm going to mention later on as well about that. Then after that, we get into what's called free jazz. And this was started kind of the late 50s, early 60s. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's free jazz, it's avant-garde. Sometimes it's called spiritual jazz, but it is the most out there, right? There is no rules, and it can get bizarre and it can get intense too. Some of the later era John Coltrane stuff, I put it up there with listening to early Metallica, like speed metal. It is just it's crazy and it's unsettling, and it's very interesting, but you don't know where it's gonna go or what they're gonna do. And that's the part that's also kind of exciting about that. And John Coltrane, late in his career, was a big proponent of free jazz, and he did almost all free jazz and spiritual jazz towards the end of his career. Miles Davis dipped his toes in that water as well. Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis did a little bit, but the big people in that were Ornette Coleman was one of the pioneers of free jazz, Eric Dolphy as well, and Alice Coltrane, who was John Coltrane's wife up until his death, was also a big proponent of free jazz, and then also was Pharoah Sanders, and they all worked together too. Pharoah Sanders, Alice Coltrane, and John Coltrane did several albums together. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, we won't get into it too much, late 60s and throughout the 70s, you have a lot of jazz fusion. That's where they're introducing rock elements, electric guitars, electric instruments, and there's lots of artists that went into this category, including Miles Davis. So those are kind of the main categories, and now I'm just going to quickly talk about the major labels that you'll find for jazz too, that are almost always have the big titles on them. And I'm not going to cover all of them, and I'm going to cover the big ones. So this album here is called the Django, and this was the Modern Jazz Quartet. And I will show you the label. This is Prestige, which is one of the big labels for jazz music. And here's what the Prestige label looks like. So the mono was in yellow, and the stereo was usually in black. But most jazz enthusiasts want mono because they want to hear all the instruments and all the orchestration up front. They don't want panning back and forth of instruments. And the original labels will have these deep grooves on them. I don't know if you can see them or not. And then they have the original address of the 446 West 50th Street, NYC. So this is the very first incarnation of the label. So Prestige was a big one, and Miles Davis started his career on Prestige, as did John Coltrane, and as did many other artists. And one of the other big labels, oh, I forgot to mention, Prestige started in 1949. They later went on to be bought by Fantasy in 1971, and then in 2005, Fantasy and Prestige were acquired by a group called Concord in 2005. So the other big label is Blue Note. I'm sure you've heard of Blue Note. If you haven't, then you probably haven't heard a lot about jazz, but Blue Note and Prestige are probably one of the biggest ones to do it. And here's what the Blue Note label looks like. And this is a really early incarnation label as well. You have the double deep grooves. This is a mono. And then you have the address there as well. Say Blue Note Records, 161 Lexington Avenue, NYC. And then the early ones too do not have the registered trademark there below note. There'll be an R in a circle right below the E there if they're newer than this. So, and Blue Note started in 1939, and they had some of the biggest hard bop albums and bop albums of the late 50s, early 60s, and there's tons and tons of great reissues and represses if you can't afford a original, which a lot of people can't because they can be very outrageous in price. So another label that was very big for jazz was called Impulse, and this was on this was owned by ABC and Paramount. And I'll show you what the first label of that looks like. The first ones were orange, like this, and they have Impulse around, all the way around, and then in the very bottom there it says a product of ABC Paramount Records, or they would say a product of AmPan Records. So that's what to look for the very first labels from Impulse. And John Coltrane was one of the first big artists to sign to Impulse. So the whole back half of his catalog is on Impulse. They started in 1960, and yeah, they're a great label. I wouldn't shy away from anything you see on that. And then another one that was really big as well is Columbia. So here's Miles Davis. He was on Columbia for a long time. And a lot of his albums were on this 6i right there. And this is Miles Ahead. This is a cool jazz album. And this one has deep groove labels as well. So the last label that I'm going to talk about before we get into artists is Riverside. And Riverside started in 1953, and they had artists like Thelonious Monk and Bill Evans, and Chet Baker had some albums on there as well. And I will show you what the Riverside label looks like. And they were similar to Prestige in that they had different colors for stereo and for mono. And this is a mono deep groove here. It has the little reel-to-reel up top. And then it says Bill Grauer Productions, New York City. So this is a very early label. The later ones will say Inc., Bill Grauer Productions, Inc. And then a lot of times the label will be bigger as well. But that's something to look for when you're looking for an original Riverside label. All right, now that we've gone through the genres, we've gone through some of the big labels that carry jazz. Now let's talk about some of the artists that I think that would be really good starter artists for people to get into, to see if you're into it, to whet your appetite, see if you want to go further, or maybe it's not for you. But I think a great person to start with, who goes through really all the genres that we discussed for the most part, is Miles Davis. He was a trumpeter, and his first essential album that I would say, and it's in the cool jazz vein, this is a comp, is The Birth of Cool from 1957. I'd say this is the first essential Miles Davis that you would want to listen to. He's got Max Roach on here, Jerry Mulligan, And a lot of times that's what you look for. If you're not familiar with everybody, if you're not familiar with the particular title, if you look for the artists that are playing on there, that might be a good indication if that's something that you're into. This one's on Capitol, which there's not a ton of jazz on Capitol, but there are a few here and there. So that's the first one I would recommend from Miles. The next one I would recommend is on Prestige. It's the Miles Davis Quintet. It's called Relaxin'. And this one is an awesome quintet. And this type of music is hard bop. And on here you have Miles Davis on trumpet. You've got John Coltrane on tenor sax, Red Garland on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Philly Joe Jones on drums. So it's a really good quintet. All right. The third one I'm going to recommend is a big one and considered by many as maybe the best jazz album of all time, and that is Kind of Blue. This is the mono version from 1959, and this is considered modal jazz, and this is also considered one of his masterpieces. And on here, again, you have just amazing players. You have Cannonball Adderley, you have John Coltrane, you have Wynton Kelly, Bill Evans, Paul Chambers, and James Cobb. And this is kind of considered a perfect album. So if you take away nothing else from this, and there's only one album that you choose to listen to from Miles Davis, I would make it probably this one here. All right. Number 4 on Columbia from 1961, we have Someday My Prince Will Come. It's the Miles Davis Sextet. And on this one, he has help from John Coltrane, Hank Mobley, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Jimmy Cobb. And the reason I recommend this one is because Someday My Prince Will Come is the jazz standard that Miles Davis liked the best, and that's the one that he'd play a lot of times to warm up. And it shows up on quite a few of his recordings because it was his favorite standard to play. So I think that it's an essential album to listen to because you need to hear him play it. All right, the next one I would suggest is In a Silent Way from 1969. And this is the first fusion / electric album that he would go on to play. And it was kind of a landmark in his career. And he got a lot of guff from jazz purists, but this album has gone on to be seen as one of the most influential as far as jazz fusion goes and pushing the genre forward. So I would definitely check out Miles Davis In a Silent Way from 1969, again on Columbia. And then right after that, he did an album called Bitches Brew from 1970 that is, again, probably one of his most well-known, well-regarded albums, and it's fusion. It's out there. It's a harder pill to swallow. I would not start with this one, but I would say if you like the other things that you hear, I would dip your toes in the water with this one, but I don't think that this is the place to start with Miles, but it's certainly a huge one in his canon, in his catalog, and worth listening to, worth trying to figure out if you're into it, because he has some stuff after this that I think is easier pill to swallow right off the bat, and I'm going to show you those right next. This is 1970 Columbia. All right, another one that I think is absolutely essential and one of my favorites, and this is more soul jazz, jazz funk, and it's Miles Davis on the corner, and he was actually married to Betty Davis at the time. I don't know if you know Betty Davis, but she influenced a lot of his style and the things that he was doing at the time, and then he came out with this really awesome funky, jazzy album from 1972 on Columbia. All right, the last one I'm going to show you from Miles is one of my favorite from his later era. It's from 1976 on Columbia Records. It's a double album. It's called Agerta. And this one again is fusion, it's jazz funk, it's way out there, it's exotic sounds, and I absolutely love it. I think this sounds entirely different than how he started his career with cool jazz, but it's so fun to go through his catalog and see all the different changes that he went through as a band leader, and just the different, changing with the era, right? You know, he had a really long career. So this is my last favorite album of his through his career. So the next person that we're going to talk about is another big one that wasn't a trumpet player like Miles, but rather a saxophone player, and that's John Coltrane. And so these are two of the biggest artists that you're going to run into. And here's the albums that I think are essential from John Coltrane that you should check out. The first one is self-titled. It's called Coltrane. And this was his first album. It's on Prestige. Came out in 1957. And this was his first as a band leader. So that's why I recommend this one. And it's fantastic. He has help from Red Garland and Paul Chambers on this one. And it's a really fantastic album, and shows kind of where things are headed with him, at least in the immediate future for John Coltrane. The next one that's really big from John Coltrane and a must came out in 1958, and it's one of his landmark albums. It's Blue Train, and Blue Train is absolutely fantastic. He had help on Blue Train from Lee Morgan on trumpet, Curtis Fuller on trombone, John Coltrane was on tenor sax, obviously, Kenny Drew on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and then Philly Joe Jones on drums again. And one of the things that is so cool about Blue Train is this was one of his only releases on Blue Note. He wasn't signed to Blue Note, so they had him courtesy of Blue Note on here. But this has gone on to be one of his most renowned albums, one of his most sought after, and it's absolutely beautiful. And this one is in the hard bop style, as is his first one. I didn't mention that is also in the hard bop style, the self-titled Coltrane. All right, the third one from John Coltrane is on Atlantic, and it came out in 1960, and it's called Giant Steps. I would highly recommend this one as well. This one's hard bop, and he was on Atlantic for a short while. This one has the black labels. I'll show you, since we didn't talk about Atlantic earlier. But this has black labels for mono, and then it has deep grooves as well. So this is a lot of times what the Atlantic Jazz will look like. And this is just a beautiful album. And he has a tribute to his first wife on here, number 2 on side 2. It's called Namia, and that was the name of his wife before he went on to marry Alice later in his career. But just a gorgeous song, a gorgeous album. And again, you're seeing the progression from John Coltrane. You're seeing his abilities and where he's headed as an artist and as a band leader. So after Giant Steps, the other one that I highly recommend, number 4, also on Atlantic, is called My Favorite Things, right here. And the reason I suggest this particular album is because My Favorite Things was the jazz standard that was the favorite of John Coltrane. So they played this to warm up. This was his song. This is on several albums of his. But again, to hear him play it and play extended versions of it is amazing, because he knows it forward and backward, and it's his favorite. And I'll show you what the label looks like on this one. This is a later Atlantic label. In this one you have the red and purple, or red and plum. And again, just another beautiful, beautiful album. And he has help from McCoy Tyner on this one, Elvin Jones, and Steve Davis. And like I said, I highly recommend that you hear them perform their standards, because those are the ones that they've got dialed in and they know forward and backward and could do blindfolded. So the next album from John Coltrane that is very important in his catalog, and it is on Impulse, is Live at the Village Vanguard. This one came out in 1962 on Impulse, and this one has modal themes and hard bop themes. And this one, again, is just a landmark album, as a lot of the live albums are. But you have John Coltrane on sax, Eric Dolphy on clarinet, McCoy Tyner on piano, Reggie Workman on bass, and Elvin Jones on drums. And this one, again, is just a live tour de force and just amazing. Just amazing. So after this album, the one that I would highly recommend, and again, I think this is a good one if you don't listen to any other ones out of John Coltrane's catalog. I think this Ballads album that came out in 1963 is a fantastic one. And this one has elements of modal jazz and cool jazz, but it is so easy to listen to. It's so warm, and they cranked this thing out really fast. They recorded this amazingly fast, but you can't tell. It just sounds so smooth, so relaxed, and just so enjoyable. And he has help on this one with from McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones. And again, I can't recommend this one enough. It's the John Coltrane Quartet, and the album's Ballads. All right, the other one that is really big in John's catalog, and one of the most sought after ones, is A Love Supreme on Impulse as well. This one came out in 1965, and this is post-bop with some free jazz leanings. So that's what I'm going to say. It's not free jazz completely, but there's some spoken word in it, and there are some elements that lean towards free jazz. But this is highly sought after, very amazing, and genre pushing. This is the mono version, and it's fantastic. After this, he definitely got into the free jazz territory and far out there. So I would say after A Love Supreme, I would tread with caution if you're afraid of what free jazz is about. So the last one I'm going to recommend from John Coltrane is in the free jazz category, but I would say more with spiritual leanings, and not as difficult pill to swallow as some of his other albums. This one came out on Impulse in 1971 after he had already passed away. And like I said, this has free jazz and spiritual jazz leanings, and he had help from McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Elvin Jones on this one. And it's fantastic, and I think it's a good one to start if you want to try his free jazz, but you don't know where to start. I would start with Sunship. Okay, now, last but not least, I'm going to talk about a few cool jazz artists. We're going to run through them real quick. Good places to start. Dave Brubeck, Time Out. This one came out in 1959 and is hailed as one of the biggest, most important cool jazz albums. Dave Brubeck was a pianist. This one came out on the Columbia 6i. This is the mono version. Time Out is a well-known song. The rest of the album sounds much the same. This is a highly lauded, highly respected cool jazz album, and a great one to start if you want to delve further into cool jazz. Another artist that I love that was a cool jazz artist for most of his career is Chet Baker. This is Chet Baker Sings, and it's called Chet Baker Sings because he does sing on some of the tracks here. And this one came out in 1956 on Pacific Jazz. And he does one of his standards on here, which is My Funny Valentine, which is just a gorgeous song. Some people don't like Chet Baker's voice. They just want to hear him play. I'm fine with either. I love the sound of his voice. I love the way he plays. It's all good to me. Another good Chet Baker album on World Pacific Jazz that came out in 1958 is Chet Baker and Art Pepper. This one has the cheesecake cover, so this one's kind of sought after. But again, more West Coast styling, cool jazz, and just a great, great album. Here's another Chet Baker. This one's Chet Baker plays Lerner and Lowe from 1959. This one is Bop Cool Jazz. This was on the Riverside label. And just another great example of cool jazz stylings from Chet Baker. Here's a later one called Baby Breeze. And this one was on Limelight. This came out later in 1965. And there are some vocals on this one as well. Not every track has vocals, but again, absolutely love it. All right, last couple artists I'm going to show you. Cool jazz, West Coast cool jazz again. We have Stan Getz and Gerry Mulligan, both played saxophone. This one came out in 1960 on Verve. Again, just quintessential West Coast cool jazz. And these ones aren't that expensive, and they give you a good idea of what the genre is about. So one half is Stan Getz and Gerry Mulligan, and then the other half here is Stan Getz and the Oscar Peterson Trio. And then the other one is Getz meets Mulligan in Hi-Fi. So this one came out not too long after that other one, just a year later in 1960. And again, you've got two West Coast cool jazz giants going head to head, and it makes for great music. So I think I have gone on long enough for this one. We may do a part 2 if this is well received and you like it. If not, we'll move on to the next topic. So I'm easy like that. But I will say, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and let me know what some of your favorite artists are. Let me know what you want me to talk about, and yeah, we'll go from there. I've got a bunch of other great topics for you. So until next time, be well.